In 2022, an international manhunt for a suspected murderer ended with a suspect who had a new nose, a new name, and like a remarkably wild alibi.
Oh, absolutely wild. She had a literal spy kit.
Right. But the weapon that actually threatened to derail the entire American justice system wasn't found in her fugitive spy kit. It was a single invisible skin cell found on a bicycle.
Yeah, which is fascinating because we usually think of DNA as this perfect binary mechanism. You run the swab, you get a match, and boom, you have your answer.
Right, like an infallible X-ray machine or something.
Exactly. But the reality, especially when we start talking about microscopic traces of DNA, is this landscape of diagnostic muddy waters. It is not as clear-cut as the general public thinks.
So let's set the scene. May 2022. The murder of professional gravel cyclist Moriah Wilson, known as Mo Wilson.
Right.
She was visiting Austin, Texas for a race. She went swimming at a local pool, had dinner with a fellow pro cyclist named Colin Strickland, and he dropped her off at a friend's house on his motorcycle.
And that motorcycle helmet becomes a huge detail later on.
Oh, massive detail, because later that evening, she was found shot to death. And the prime suspect almost immediately became Colin Strickland's girlfriend, Caitlin Armstrong.
And the subsequent flight from Justice by Armstrong, it captured international headlines. She didn't just lay low, she executed a highly calculated escape.
It was a 43-day international saga. According to the news reports, right after the murder, Armstrong sold her Jeep for like $12,000 in cash and just vanished.
Just completely off the grid.
Yeah. She fled the country using her sister's passport, landed in Costa Rica, and embedded herself in this small beach town. She dated locals, she taught yoga, and get this, she spent over $6,000 on plastic surgery to change the shape of her nose.
Right, and she adopted the alias Allison Page. And when locals asked her about the severe bruising under her eyes from the rhinoplasty, she claimed she had been in a surfing accident.
A surfing accident. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
You really can't.
But the federal authorities eventually tracked her down. And when they searched her belongings, they found that literal spy kit we mentioned. She had her sister's passport, numerous credit cards under different names, including Colin Strickland's and a racing team, name a white iPhone, medical paperwork, just a mountain of aliases.
So she's brought back to Texas to stand trial.
Right. And now, going back to the original crime scene in Austin, Mo Wilson's racing bicycle was initially missing from the house, but investigators actually found it discarded outside in the dirt.
And this is where the narrative shifts from standard police work to complex mathematics. Investigators swabbed the bicycle's handlebars and the seat for DNA and sent those swabs to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab.
Enter the DNA analyst, Samantha Perkins. The sources mentioned she used a software program called STRmix to analyze the results, and she found a 3-person mixture of DNA on both the seat and the handlebars.
Yes.
But wait. How does a program like that actually untangle 3 different people's genetic material from a single dirty swab?
It is incredibly complex. So when you have a mixed sample, especially a degraded one from a bicycle seat left in the dirt, the DNA profile doesn't look like a clean barcode.
Okay, what does it look like?
It looks like a chaotic line graph with different peaks and valleys representing genetic markers. STRmix uses what we call probabilistic genotyping.
Probabilistic genotyping. That sounds intense.
It is. It runs thousands upon thousands of mathematical simulations, essentially rolling the dice over and over to calculate which combinations of human DNA would most likely produce that specific chaotic graph.
Wow. And the statistical results of that simulation heavily implicated Caitlin Armstrong.
Very heavily.
The report states the DNA on the bicycle seat was 224 billion times more probable if Armstrong, Wilson, and an unknown person contributed to it, rather than Wilson and 2 totally random unknowns. And Colin Strickland, the boyfriend, was entirely excluded.
And, that number, 224 billion times more probable to a layperson, that sounds like absolute, undeniable proof of guilt.
Right. If you find my DNA on a stolen diamond, this standard test with the Texas Forensic Science Commission report called subsource testing just says, hey, it's your DNA.
Exactly.
But wait, let's unpack this. That doesn't tell you if I stole the diamond or if I just shook hands with the actual thief yesterday, right? It answers the who, but completely ignores the how.
You've hit on a fundamental concept in forensic science there. It's known as the hierarchy of propositions.
Okay, the hierarchy of propositions. What is that?
When forensic scientists look at evidence, they evaluate it at different levels. The subsource level, which is what standard DNA testing does, only answers the question, whose DNA is this? It looks at the genetic profile and compares it.
So it's basically the X-ray saying the bone is broken, but it doesn't tell you if I fell off a ladder or got hit by a car.
That is a perfect analogy,
Mhm.
yes. The next level up on that hierarchy is the activity level.
Activity level.
Right. The activity level asks, how or when did the DNA get there? Did Caitlin Armstrong physically grab the bicycle and throw it outside, which would be a direct activity?
Okay.
Or did her DNA get on the bicycle through some other indirect route? Standard subsource DNA testing, no matter how advanced STR mix is, cannot answer that activity level question.
Which opens the door for the defense to offer a completely different story for how that DNA got on the bike.
Exactly.
And the defense in this trial brought in an expert named Matthew Cortaro to testify about transfer DNA. They proposed a chain of events that, honestly, sounds wild on the surface. They pointed out that Armstrong, Wilson, and Strickland had all worn that same motorcycle helmet we talked about earlier, just at different times.
Right. They established a timeline where Armstrong had worn it a month prior and Wilson wore it on the day of the murder.
So the defense's hypothetical chain is this. Armstrong's DNA gets inside the helmet. A month later, Wilson puts it on. Armstrong's DNA transfers to Wilson's head.
Yes.
Then, when Wilson takes the helmet off, the DNA transfers to Wilson's hands. Finally, Wilson touches her own bicycle, transferring Armstrong's DNA to the handlebars and the seat.
In forensic terms, they are describing a chain of secondary, tertiary, and quaternary DNA transfer.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. Primary transfer is me touching an object. Secondary is me touching your hand and you touching the object. Tertiary is a 3-step jump. Quaternary is a 4-step jump.
Wow.
Yeah. The defense is suggesting a quaternary transfer here. Armstrong to the helmet, to Wilson's head, to Wilson's hands, to the bike.
And the defense asks Cortaro, their expert, if it is possible for Armstrong's DNA to get on the bike without her ever touching it. And he testifies under oath, yes, it is possible.
He did.
Now, I have to push back here. Here's where it gets really interesting. If it is scientifically possible for a microscopic skin cell to bounce from a helmet to a head to a hand to a bike, why shouldn't the defense ask that? Isn't exploring every single remote possibility the entire point of reasonable doubt in our justice system?
Well, from a purely legal standpoint, sure, exploring doubt is a defense attorney's job. But from a scientific standpoint, simply asking, is it possible, is deeply misleading to a jury.
Really? How so? If the laws of physics allow for a skin cell to travel that way, shutting down the question feels like hiding the truth from the jury.
It's not about hiding the truth, it's about context. When an expert scientist in a suit sits on a witness stand and says an event is possible, human psychology takes over. We fall into a cognitive trap. Scientists refer to a specific variation of this as the prosecutor's fallacy, though here the defense is leveraging the same psychological blind spot.
Okay, the prosecutor's fallacy. What exactly is that?
The fallacy happens when people confuse the probability of finding the evidence given a specific scenario with the probability of the scenario itself.
Break that down with an example for me.
Imagine you buy a lottery ticket. Is it possible you win the jackpot and get struck by lightning on the way to cash it?
Yes, it's technically possible.
Right. The universe allows for both events to occur. But if you simply tell someone it's possible without explaining the mathematical probability that it's a 1 in several trillion chance, they will vastly overvalue the likelihood of it happening.
Ah, I see. A jury hears possible from a scientist and equates it to plausible or even probable.
Exactly. International forensic guidelines, specifically from the ISFG and ENFSI, which are the gold standards in Europe, warn heavily against allowing this kind of testimony for that exact reason.
So how do scientists actually determine the probability of something like DNA parkour from a helmet to a bike?
They use a framework called TPPR that stands for transfer, persistence, prevalence, and recovery. You have to mathematically calculate each step.
Okay, so step 1, transfer.
Right. What are the odds of DNA shedding into the helmet in the first place? Second, persistence. Would Armstrong's specific DNA persist inside a sweaty motorcycle helmet for a full month?
That's a long time for a cell to hang around in a helmet.
It is. Third is prevalence. How much background DNA from other people is already in that helmet diluting the sample? And finally, recovery. What are the odds of investigators swapping that exact microscopic cell off the bike later?
So to just say it's possible completely ignores the staggering mathematical odds against that exact 4-step transfer actually happening.
Precisely.
Well, the prosecution sees the jury listening to his whole helmet transfer theory, and they realize they need to shut it down. They need to show that while it might be possible to get struck by lightning, it probably didn't happen here. So how did the state respond?
The prosecution called a rebuttal witness, Dr. Timothy Califoot. And according to the Texas Forensic Science Commission report, this decision triggered a massive procedural and scientific dispute.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Dr. Califoot attempted to perform an activity-level evaluation on the stand. To my knowledge, and according to the report, this was the first time an evaluation utilizing activity-level propositions was intentionally prepared in advance for a trial in Texas.
So he looked at two theories. Theory 1, Armstrong touched the bike directly. Theory 2, the DNA transferred through that four-step motorcycle helmet chain. And Califoot testifies that it is much more likely that Armstrong directly grabbed the bike, effectively shutting down the defense's theory.
Well, he tried to shut it down, but the problem was his methodology. His testimony became the subject of a formal complaint to the Texas Forensic Science Commission by a DNA consultant named Tiffany Roy.
And what was her complaint?
She argued that Califoot broke the rules of international best practices. He didn't write a formal report, he didn't cite adequate peer-reviewed literature, and his propositions, the way he structured those two competing theories, were mathematically flawed.
And the commission agreed with several of her points, didn't they?
They did.
They noted that instead of a formal scientific report, Califoot just handed over an evidence reconciliation document. Like, he provided some mathematical calculations, but he didn't provide a transparent formula or the Bayesian network required to back up his math.
And showing the math is everything in this field. In international systems, like in the United Kingdom or the Netherlands, if an expert is going to testify about TPPR, how DNA moved from point A to point B, they must build a complex statistical model.
And that's the Bayesian network.
Yes. The standard tool for this is a Bayesian network.
What exactly is a Bayesian network doing that a regular, back-of-the-napkin calculation isn't?
A Bayesian network is a graphical mathematical model that updates the probability of a hypothesis as more evidence becomes available. Imagine a sprawling spider web.
Okay, picture a spider web.
Each intersection on the web is a variable. The helmet, the sweat, the hands, the bike handlebars. The network calculates conditional probabilities.
Like what?
It asks things like, given that we know it was 90 degrees outside, how does that change the probability of sweat transferring the DNA? You have to plug in empirical data from published peer-reviewed studies for every single node on that web to calculate the exact likelihood ratio.
Man, it sounds to me like Dr. Califoot basically gave the jury the final score of the game. But Tiffany Roy threw a red flag because he never proved he actually kept score.
That is, yes.
He gave the right-sounding answer. Direct contact is way more likely.
Yeah.
But he refused to show his map to the opposing team.
That analogy is perfectly aligned with the commission's findings. You cannot just stand up in court and declare, well, my gut feeling as an expert with 30 years of experience is that it's much more likely she touched the bike.
Right.
There must be a documented mathematical trail of evidence that the opposing side can review, audit, and challenge.
The report also states Califoot's propositions were circular. Like, he basically built the DNA findings directly into his alternative theory, which the commission said is a massive scientific violation. It's like saying, assuming the DNA transferred from the helmet, what are the odds the DNA transferred from the helmet?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a closed loop that guarantees the outcome you want.
And the ISFG guidelines are very strict regarding this exact trap. You cannot interweave the evidence itself into the proposition you are testing. You have to keep the activity, someone physically moving the bike entirely separate from the observation, finding the genetic material. Mixing them up creates a self-fulfilling statistical prophecy.
Reading this Texas Forensic Science Commission report, it feels less like a critique of one guy, Dr. Califoot, and more like an indictment of the entire American criminal justice system when it comes to science. We are looking at a profound culture clash.
The report really highlights a massive structural difference between how the United States handles expert testimony and how the rest of the scientific world operates. It exposes the flaws of the American adversarial system.
Yeah, the report specifically uses the phrase, trial by ambush.
Right. In the U.S., the prosecution was allowed to bring in Dr. Califoot on rebuttal with virtually no advance notice. The defense didn't know he was coming.
Wow.
Califoot himself was told about the specific helmet theory the morning he was driving to the courthouse to testify.
Wait, really? He's literally in his car, and they're telling him to calculate the odds of DNA transferring through a motorcycle helmet over the course of a month, and he's going on the stand in an hour.
That's exactly what happened. And under international scientific guidelines, that scenario is completely unacceptable.
I can imagine.
European systems operate on a principle called equality of arms. Data, models, and empirical studies must be shared well in advance of the trial. Experts from both the prosecution and the defense might even meet beforehand to agree on the math and the structure of those Bayesian network models.
So they're actually working together on the science before they fight in court.
Exactly. The goal is to ensure the jury isn't confused by last-minute, unverified scientific claims.
But the U.S. system isn't built for that level of collaboration at all. And the report makes a staggering point about the sheer lack of training available here. If you want to be certified to do these activity-level propositions in Europe, you have to take a 13-month university-level course at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland.
Yes, 13 months.
It takes over a year of rigorous academic study. Meanwhile, U.S. DNA analysts are receiving, at best, a 1- or 2-day workshop at an annual conference.
It is a severe lack of infrastructure. We are asking American DNA analysts who are brilliant at determining whose DNA it is at the subsource level to suddenly become advanced statistical modelers of complex human activity.
Yeah.
And we are doing it without giving them the formal training or the time to do it properly.
But wait, let me ask you this. If the expert is forbidden by these guidelines from saying it's possible because it confuses the jury, and they don't have the 13 months of Swiss training to build a precise mathematical Bayesian network, what can they say to you, the jury, without breaking the rules? Are they just supposed to sit there in silence while lawyers make up wild theories?
That is the exact dilemma the Texas Forensic Science Commission had to solve. Their interim recommendation, which is their stopgap solution for all Texas labs right now, is that the expert must gracefully admit the limits of their science.
Gracefully admit the limits, meaning what exactly when they are sitting under oath?
Meaning they must explicitly testify that their standard DNA test only answers who. If a lawyer asks them how or when the DNA got there, the policy dictates they must state that they cannot answer hypothetical questions without a separate, rigorous mathematical evaluation.
An evaluation that, in most American cases, simply hasn't been done.
Right. They have to look the jury in the eye and tell them that guessing would be speculative and potentially misleading.
They have to say, I don't know, and my science cannot tell you the answer right now. I mean, that is a hugely humbling moment for American forensic science.
Absolutely.
We are so conditioned by the media to view the scientist as the hero who has all the answers. You know, the person who solves the case with a glowing computer screen in 45 minutes.
It requires a massive paradigm shift, but it is deeply necessary. Juries put immense weight on the word of a scientist. If an expert offers an educated guess about how a skin cell moved, a jury treats that guess as an absolute scientific fact. The justice system has to recognize the boundaries of its own tools.
We started today with a sensational, movie-ready true crime story. Caitlin Armstrong fleeing to Costa Rica, selling a Jeep, spending thousands on a new nose, using aliases to hide from a murder charge. A narrative driven by recognizable human behavior, guilt, and flight.
But beneath that Hollywood narrative, we uncovered a fundamental flaw in how American courtrooms handle microscopic reality. The transfer of a single invisible skin cell from a hand to a bicycle seat triggered a systemic reckoning.
It exposed that our legal system is demanding answers that our current scientific infrastructure is simply not prepared to give. We want the clean X-ray. We want the binary certainty of a broken or unbroken bone.
But the reality is probabilistic. It is a Bayesian network of variables built on empirical data that takes months to calculate properly.
So the next time you are reading a news headline or listening to a true crime show and they dramatically announce the suspect's DNA was found at the scene, your brain should immediately hit the pause button.
You should ask yourself, okay, we know the who, but how did it get there? And more importantly, did they mathematically prove that chain of events, or are they just guessing?
Don't settle for the who. Demand the math on the how.
And as international forensic science moves further toward incredibly complex mathematical models, using algorithms to calculate the exact 1 in a billion odds of how a cell traveled from a helmet to a bike, we are approaching a fascinating horizon. Will we eventually reach a point in our legal system where human juries are no longer actually deciding guilt based on evaluating a compelling story and physical evidence? Will jurors just become rubber stamps, asked to blindly trust a computer's algorithmic likelihood ratio of a microscopic event they can't possibly understand?
If the math becomes too complex for the jury, who is really rendering the verdict, that is something to think about.